All right, cool. You guys ready?
Listo.
Estamos listo. Hey, look, we got a few viewers coming in between two platforms. Cool. It's always cool seeing them trickle in. All right, so today we're going to go over a few things with the Twitter files. Like we said, we promised at the end of last year we're going to try to do one of these a quarter at least. Sam was feeling super ambitious towards the end of last year. He thought like once a month would be good. And then the first quarter of 23 hit, and it's been hellacious for all of us.
Well,
But
we're all busy.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, this, like I said, this is no one's primary gig yet. It's actually funny. I was talking to a couple of the podcast guests, and actually, I think two of them asked me, "What do I want to like do whenever I get done with the PhD?" And I said, "Definitely not be a professional podcaster." The amount of effort relative to production is insane. But anyway,
Yeah.
so hopefully we'll start churning out some more podcast episodes. We'll talk more about that towards the end. But good news is that we've got some really cool stuff, I think, to show people today, not just in terms of a live stream, but also in terms of a data dump or a file dump anyway. Many thanks to my colleagues here and our silent partner, Franklin, who's with some family right now. So hopefully he's able to tune in at some point, but he will not be joining us for the stream portion of this. For today, we're going to go over the Twitter files again, but as opposed to kind of just freestyling it, we'll do a little bit of that, but we also have some particular aspects that kind of speak to our individual specialties and interests that we're going to touch on, and give an overview of that. And we're also going to simultaneously, once this stream comes down and we get everything processed, what we'll do is we will upload this content to freedomcast.us under the content webpage. Apologize for the train noise in the background. And there will be two partner files with this. There will be a prototype database that contains Twitter files 1 through 15, except I think 9. And what we did was we, in line item fashion, went and began... Can't hear the train, bro. Thanks, Gal. You can just chime in. You don't have to send chat. But in any case, what we will...
You will not be able to see real well, Cotton.
Great callback. But no, so we'll dump this database file, which again is kind of this line item audit we've done of the Twitter files, so that if people want to see the facts without the any sort of potential editorialization, you can go in and just see what did happen between different parties. And we have set it up kind of like a relational database where you have agents as one table and relationships as another. Relationships are links between agents, which you'll see a lot of tonight. And
Mike, hold up.
Yep.
Before we get too deep into that, because Nicole did a poll,
Okay.
and a couple people didn't even know what the Twitter files was.
Oh,
So
yeah. Okay.
let's start there.
Okay. Sam, what are the Twitter files?
Twitter files. So when Elon Musk took over Twitter the end of last year, right? It was the end of last year?
Yeah. Roughly.
He allowed he allowed a handful of journalists to come in and just dig through any of the files that they wanted to. And I believe that he pretty much gave them the freedom to go to dig where they wanted to and to report on what they wanted to. And so the Twitter files is their report to the public of the various things hidden inside Twitter. So that could be anything from emails between like executives, or it could be communications from Twitter to various agencies, as we'll talk about. Or it could just be Slack channels. It could just be various Twitter employees just talking to one another. And it's revelatory because it confirms many suspicions that I think a lot of people had who were falsely accused of being conspiracy theorists. But I think in reality, they were more or less just hypothesizing. Yeah, they were just, it's like people could sort of see the writing on the wall, and it's not conspiracy theory. Well, it turns out that they were quite correct in a lot of their assumptions. So that's what these Twitter files are revealing. And Mike, why would anybody care? Like, why is this important to the
Sure.
average person,
Yeah, I
especially
think
for the someone who doesn't even know what the Twitter files is?
right. Yeah, that's fair enough. And just so you know, we are monitoring the chat. Yeah, we can talk about Chat GPT kind of in the freestyle session here at the end, for sure. The why should someone care? Well, one thing to just maybe tune up a little bit from what you just said is with to be precise, they weren't doing necessarily the querying of email archives or of Slack channel messages or anything like that. They were providing the criteria for queries to people, and that actually matters in some of the early Twitter files because there was an intermediate screen in the form of a former FBI leader who was deputy counsel at Twitter who got fired because of potentially interfering with that querying process. But to the extent this is a criticism that's been levied at the Twitter Files journalists, which is, are you just doing the bidding of the world's richest man? And the answer is, well, they are receiving tens to hundreds of thousands of documents back in their queries from these Twitter agents that they're interacting with. And you could say that, well, maybe they're withholding something from them, but the problem with that is you're always relying on a source for a news story. So at some point in the chain, you have to assume people are acting even if you assume they're acting on their own, in their own interest, you have to assume that they're being as transparent as is appropriate for the story. So if you have quibbles with that, that's totally fine. And we could talk about maybe ways that people would have those fears resolved, if at all possible. But that is one thing I wanted to fill in. Why should you care? Well, because the whole conspiracy theory thing, it's like we actually need, much like many of the terms in society, we need words to mean things. And conspiracy theorizing, at least as a pejorative, is actually something that is useful to be able to label in a way that says, hey, don't pay attention to this. Like, it's kind of not worth your time to look into or whatever, as shorthand. But the problem is we've inflated that term, like we've inflated so many terms, to where it effectively means nothing now. And so when Elon jokes with Joe Rogan, for example, he goes, turns out all the conspiracy theories were true, in the wake of the Twitter files. It's like, well, were they all true? I don't know, but certainly more than we were led to believe have been shown to have some level of veracity to them. And what I hope we can do tonight is show you that it's not a political stance to be interested in the Twitter files. Like, there's a apparatus, formal and informal, that has been grafted onto these digital media platforms to facilitate not the expression of speech, but the suppression of it. And you should care about this, whether you're, well, in particular, if you're a populist political enthusiast, because this has been done to suppress people on left and right in the populist wings, but also more generally because it's antithetical to kind of the norms and values that, this country claims to espouse.
So, just ask a real quick question. What about, like, why should somebody care if they're not an American?
So a lot of the stuff around kind of free speech versus censorship, content moderation versus free expression, it does come, like, the debate stems from kind of a Western tradition of free expression, saying something like more voices, over the long run, in general, more voices being able to be heard will cause less damage than selectively choosing which voices can be heard. And so that's actually an idea, cultural artifact that I would like to think the West could credibly export. And to the extent that these digital platforms are more liberating than totalizing, it's not just limited to the United States. This is true for TikTok. This is true for, I think it's Weibo, which is the Chinese version of Twitter. There's a lot of top-down moderation that happens at some of these companies. In the United States, it's supposed to not be that way. It's supposed to be much more bottom-up and organic free-for-all, or something to that effect. Unfortunately, it's not, and so it's starting to reflect what we see in other nations. But again, to the extent we believe something like free expression is worth upholding, then these are kind of landmark files in how that can go wrong in an ostensibly free environment.
I gotcha. I only asked because there's probably one or two Malaysians in the chat, or could be at least. So.
Sure. Well, thanks. Yeah.
The way I see it too, from an uneducated and I guess informed perspective of the matter, is that if the United States falls to this, what does that mean for countries that are less like I'm not saying like, oh, America's the greatest. But as a patriotic American, I would like to say, yeah, America's the greatest. But if we're like the golden standard for the 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 basis of freedom and being able to be free, if that were to fall, what does that mean for countries? Wow, companies. What does that mean for countries that have less freedoms than we do? And so I don't know. It's just one of those things. Like I think it sends a message to those that maybe aren't may not be an American, but those that might fall into some form of we are a part of a free state or a free country. But yet,
Yeah.
if the freest country of them all falls, like what does that mean for us?
Yeah.
Sure. I
Well
think
said.
it'll be somewhat unsurprising to people to see that there's some intelligence, U.S. intelligence influence here, which has long been the thing people point to say, or the system that people point to say, you're not as free as you claim to be, or you
Yeah.
don't live up to the values you claim to live up to, which is a totally fair enough critique as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, so we're going to go into that, and we're going to talk about this apparatus, this what's being called the censorship industrial complex, or something to that, some sort of complex around censorship. There's a few different terms for it. And then we'll each take a deep dive into a particular segment that interests us. I think Kyle's going to kick us off, kind of with some of the internal dynamics. For those who don't know, Kyle has a podcast called Thought Pioneering on FreedomCast, and it's much more about the kind of organizational practices and culture. Kyle, you want to say anything about that, so you can kind of tie that into what you're going to talk about tonight?
Yeah, I'm kind of the black sheep of the network. I don't talk anything about politics, more or less from like professional development, leadership mindset, just based off my career as an OD practitioner. But what I do like to focus on, and I'm taking kind of a newer direction, and we'll get more to that on what's next. But yeah, I do tend to focus on the creativity aspect that we can all bring into our professional lives, not only just professional, but like in like our personal lives as well. So not only what does that look like for an individual, but if you're a leader, if you have people that like direct reports that report to you, what is that? How do you influence creativity? And then taking a look at like real world creativity applied, I guess you can call it applied creativity, and examine some of the successes and failures. So I just like to talk about that, and then I'll bring in some of the organizational, like the psychology that comes with what does it take to be creative and what does it take to create an environment where creativity can flourish.
Yeah. Yeah, your second episode was my favorite of yours so far.
Real quick, sorry to
Harnessing
jump.
creativity.
Hey, sorry to jump in. Do we expect everybody to be seeing our faces? Because I don't think that's the case.
Oh, they're not going to right now. They will in a second.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
What?
Yeah. So
Gotcha.
as soon as we get clear of the Twitter files, or of this little network, we'll go back to our faces.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I can probably bring us up right here and bookmark it so they can at least see
No,
us on
that's
the
cool.
side panel. So, all right. So Kyle, I guess we'll just jump off then. You're gonna talk about some of the internal dynamics. This is, as far as we can tell, again, we have not completely audited the entire Twitter files repository yet. Just 14 of the first 18, and that will be available in database form shortly. But Kyle, you're going to talk about the internal dynamics at Twitter. So do you want to kick us off?
Yep. And just for if you can hit the little back arrow for us real quick, Mike.
Sure, yeah.
And just I know the live stream is a little delayed. What I'm really focusing on is that little arch, the Twitter circling back to Twitter. So you'll see here that we have a lot of Twitter is kind of the main instigator here of what we're going to be talking about today. Hence the name of the Twitter files. What I'm going to be focusing on is that little arch there. So go ahead, Mike.
Sure,
If you
yeah.
will.
Thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah.
All right, buddy, go ahead.
All right. So just to kind of orient you all to what we have on the screen here, we're going to follow the same format as we talk through the relationships of the Twitter files. What we like to have up here is you're going to have the Twitter. So in the top left, you'll have we call it the clade to clade relationship. So Twitter interacting within Twitter. On the right-hand column or on the right-hand side of that, you're going to see the relationships. This will be tied to an Excel sheet that I think we'll be posting
Yeah, we'll be
later.
posting and we'll update it as we get more in depth. But we'll post the alpha version of it tonight.
Right. So in the R column, or in the one of the columns, you'll see a bunch of the relationships. Like in this case, these are all the relationships that we called out based off of our examination of the Twitter files that had to do with Twitter to Twitter relationships. So that's just a little bit of a 101 on how we're going to be delivering this content to you today. And then I've highlighted R64 just because I look at that and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I thought I might want to expand a little bit more on that. So you'll see a summary. We'll all give a summary. Each slide will have somewhat of a summary, and then for the expanded view, I have highlighted up there. So the summary of this is that what we found is that a lot of the internal communications during the timeline that was represented consisted of agents from within Twitter looking for ways to, which I saw and which we all saw, bend certain policies in order to censor or shadow ban disfavored content from disfavored parties that were of those users, disfavored users, if you will. We saw a lot of internal, and this is straight from, this isn't my take on it. This is fact from the actual Twitter files themselves. We found evidence that there were a lot of internal communications that consisted of providing updates on discussions with government agencies about the censoring of content, clarification or troubleshooting, or how to bend a given policy so that an action of silencing accounts can be justified. A lot of those things that we saw were uh, around the Hunter Biden laptop story, about especially, or when it came to Russian disinformation. I know Mike's going to talk a little bit more about um, the Hamilton dashboard. And so we did see a lot a lot of these internal communications were, hey, can we, so if this were to happen, can we basically fit this square peg into this round hole? And there was a lot of pushback from within. Now I'm giving my synopsis on it, but there's a lot of pushback from within that. And then eventually they would say, actually, we are going to try and classify it as this. There was no hard and fast rule of yes, this is that. Even though that for the Hunter Biden laptop story, there was like, hey, there's no evidence that this was hacked materials policy. And then follow the communication channels, and then it finally was like, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and assign the hacked communications policy to this instance, and we're going to let legal know, we're going to notify legal. And so what I have for the expanded view is that Yoel Roth informs the legal, essentially, that Twitter is going to officially label the New York Post story regarding the Hunter Biden's laptop as a hacked materials based on the experts monitoring the election security and disinformation. And so that's where Yoel sends that communication to internal Twitter team, informing them that they're going to be receiving advisement from the third-party resources and the intelligence community, as well as some internal resources that are also connected to the intelligence community that have either served on the Twitter board or from the intel community that now serve in Twitter. One of those agents is going to be Matthew Perry from the FBI. They schedule a meeting with the former FBI official, and then that same day, Yoel Roth provides some more context about the hacking materials policy. So we found there that they weren't necessarily amending a policy in real time, but it almost is what it seemed like, is to be able to amend a policy so you can fit this scenario into that. So that way they didn't have to go in and formally amend the policy. Because if I'm as a HR professional, I wouldn't even call myself like an HR professional in the OD space. I'm not part of SHRM, but if I were to look at SHRM's guidelines, they clearly state on what you need to do, and it's not like a hard and fast rule, but it's more like it's a question of ethics, but what you need to do in order to amend a policy. And so there's a long list of items that you need to do, and yes, involving legal is one of them. But for me, from the outside looking in, that was more of a, hey, heads up, legal, we're making this change, so do what you need to do. And so for me, it was more of a question on ethics. Like ethically, a lot of times you run into that where companies feel like they're doing the right thing, even though when it's the wrong thing. And that's where we see, like, that's where like the beauty of like the Twitter files kind of exposing that is, yes, in a sense, you may not have been justified, but yes, in a sense, like, okay, you changed the rules kind of mid-game, but were they ethical? And so that's the majority of what we saw from the Twitter to Twitter relationships. It was more of a, hey, we're going to be bending the rule this way to account for, we're feeling pressure from the outside, whether it be from the FBI or whether it be from certain politicians are going to be bending, or from the Biden administration. We're going to be bending the rule this way so that we can, quote unquote, justify the use of this, like censoring the content, essentially was the action that was taken.
So let's take a step back from like that specific thing. So like kind of what Sam was talking about, talk to us big picture about like why this matters. And in terms of the Twitter's rules, what you're talking to there is essentially, if we sign up for Twitter and we agree to their terms of service, that's, fair enough. It's their platform, they get to develop their own rules. But, you expect some uniformity and some consistency in those rules. And how does that violate this?
Yeah, can I comment on this real quick?
Go for it, man.
Because yeah, it just seems to me okay, so I was never big into social media, so I didn't get onto Twitter or even Facebook or Instagram. And it just, from an outsider's perspective, seeing this, it just means that their terms of service might as well just say, we can change the rules whenever we want. And even because I remember, do you remember the Patreon scandal with Carl Benjamin?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so that was a big eye opener for me, because that was probably back in, what would you say, 2018, 2019?
2017, 2018, I think.
Yeah, okay, somewhere in there, yeah. And I remember listening to a phone call that somebody, well, it was a transcript of the phone call between somebody and some customer service or someone in charge of their policies. Like, there was this phone call going back and forth, like, okay, where exactly did I violate the rule? Where exactly? And essentially, it all boiled down to just like, well, it's subjective. We can decide whenever to do it. Like, it was like pulling teeth to try and get them to admit it. Mm-hmm. They don't want to admit it. And in fact, that's why I think a lot of this stuff is hidden.
Right.
And they're probably, their terms and services are, pages upon pages of legal stuff. But I think it all can just be boiled down to like, hey, we will change it if we think we can. And there's nothing you can do about it. And it's all subjective from our end. At least that's my perspective looking in. I don't know, Kyle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, from an organization, I mean, it's like, I mean, I don't know. I'm never a huge fan of when you change the rules mid-game, especially to, I don't know, you're moving the goalposts essentially. It's like, it's cheating in my mind. It's cheating. And I get to a certain extent, yeah, policies should be amended. I'm not a huge, I don't for one believe in like, if the policy is this way, it needs to be written this way. It was written this way. It should be amended policies, not like rights, not amendments. So let's in a company, because I mean, Twitter is not the United States of America, so let's not go with it. But for me, the policies in the company, because things change so rapidly, so quickly. Yes, you need to be more relevant with your policies. Technology changes, so yes, you need to be relevant. But from the fact of, hey, the policy clearly states in the hacked materials instance, the policy clearly states, like, going back to the Hunter Biden laptop story, Hunter Biden signed a waiver, and I don't know the ins and outs of every little detail, but my understanding, he signed a waiver, says, hey, if this is forgotten or left or abandoned, it gives the owner of the shop full rights to it, and he signed off on that. Mm-hmm. And now they come back and say, well, this wasn't my laptop, and then why is Hunter Biden suing the shop owner? Like, that just blows all that out of the water. So it's just more of a, hey, we need to cover this up. What doesn't help, and I think we'll get to this later, is that the Twitter actually ran a tabletop exercise for this specific scenario a couple months, back in June or July of the election year. So at least 3 to 4 months before this became a real story.
Yeah,
so,
I'll talk about that.
Yeah, later. Sam will talk about that. But it's just one of those things of, we need to change the rules. And when you start having that done, you look at what happened, and I'm not saying Twitter is Enron, but you look at what happens when you start changing policies and doing things unethically, when you happen like Enron, Wells Fargo. You can look at those big failures. That's where you start to have an issue. And I think, for one, Elon Musk stepping in was a good thing, because they weren't heading. I mean, in my view, they weren't really headed in a good direction. So,
yeah, actually, it's a good segue into my portion of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Mike, if you want to back out.
Yeah. Give me just 1 sec, though. I want to touch on one thing Kyle said there, because Kyle, you mentioned getting legal involved with policy changes. The trouble with that is, for anyone who's seen the legal actors from Twitter, and these are all in our actors table of this Excel file that's going to be a flat version of a database. Essentially, the Vice Legal Counsel is former FBI and who likely helped facilitate certain things like that tabletop exercise. And the actual chief counsel was a woman named Vijaya Gotti. And for those who are unfamiliar, I would recommend watching. She and Jack Dorsey were on with Tim Pool, an episode of Joe Rogan, maybe, must have been 2019 probably, something like that, early 2020, something like that. And it's revelatory, because what you'll see there is, it'll put some substance to what Kyle's saying in terms of the way that these things are constructed, the way their policies are constructed are not designed to, facilitate the exchange of ideas, which is what, Twitter had publicly claimed for so many years, and that they were kind of politically neutral, which is, you don't have to be politically neutral, but if you are going to make that claim, then there should be some evidence of that. And you could see the way they were circumscribing their policies didn't quite fit with that. And then when they could no longer essentially maintain that posture because of the dynamic nature around the election, and not that that was good in any sense, but that what they did was they essentially just tweaked things as needed to overcome stuff. So I do see a couple comments about how you can't see us. So we're just going through a few of the relationships in the Twitter files here, and then we will turn on our cameras and turn off the essentially interactive database here.
I think later on we need to figure out a way to where we can just swap back and forth.
Yeah, we're technology illiterate with respect to streaming. We each have our own things we do pretty well, but streaming is not one of them.
Streaming's not one of them. Yes.
Yeah. But
if I may,
go ahead.
Still chime in on that last topic. The one of the things that got me was the fact that they were trying to cover up a story that ultimately, and it wasn't really so much like election interference, but it kind of was for one directional election interference. It didn't provide a fair election. I guess we'll get into that, but it didn't really provide. I guess what I'm trying to say, without getting too controversial, is that there were probably a bunch of people out there that would have voted a different way had they heard the truth, had they seen the truth.
Well, that's unknowable, unfortunately. There's there's one mock poll by I don't know, it's one of the new digital right platforms that did something that said, hey, if did you vote for Biden, and if you did, would you have voted differently if you had heard about this story? And it was somewhere between 10 and 20% said yes, but you don't know what that means, and also the polling methodology there was abysmal. So I'm with you, Kyle, in terms of it's just unethical to change the rules kind of midstream, and to pretend like you're doing it for the sake of upholding a hacked materials policy, when you need to remember the materials were not hacked. That whole thing was nonsense. Yeah. And in the controversy, this is something we've talked about before, but the controversy was never Hunter Biden and his escapades that were extracurricular in nature, let's say, with respect to his personal life. That was, colorful, I guess, and, it made for good clickbait, but that was never the substance of what was or was not on that laptop. It was much more about potential, wielding of family name.
And to be honest, a lot of it garnered some sympathy, because you had a dad who, for more or less, was trying to get his son to maybe shape up, but but the relationship there, you could tell, was just degrading and just not good overall, and so you had a lot of people just being like, hey, look, having a son that's like that, it's not good. Or if it's your life, and you're addicted to some drugs and you have this life, it's not pretty. And that so it's not, that part of it's not really the focus. So I mean, a lot of us understand that aspect, but the focus was on, I would say, the corruption for most people.
Agreed.
Yeah, it was on the morals of which they tried to change. They tried to move the goalpost in an unethical way.
Yeah, with respect to how Twitter acted, yes. And Sam, to your point, with respect to the Bidens or and associates.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the Hunter Biden laptop story, I'm just going to go out and say it. The FBI, the intelligence community, they are not your friends. At one point in my young, naive life, I believed, I was like, you know what, they're probably good. And maybe they are. Maybe there's some. It's probably a mixed bag, right? With everything, you've probably got some people that are probably trying to uphold the American ideals and stand for something. But unfortunately, I think that they've gotten so big in their finger.
Uh-oh. Kyle, you there?
Well, it's hard to it's hard to really ignore the bad faith acting from the FBI and the CIA and just the intelligence community in general. So from we as Americans, we care about our First Amendment, and I think everybody ought to have that sense that I should be able to say and critique and think how I want to. But I'm telling you, the FBI, they did some pretty shady things in that was revealed in this Twitter file stuff. So first of all, so like a lot of the rewinding the clock and going back a bit, whenever there was any type of maybe censorship or shadow banning, there would always be something like, well, Twitter has the right to do what they want to do. It's their company. They can do it. And so you kind of got that response a lot if you ever complained that there was some shadow banning or censoring going on. But as it turned out...
Wait, so just really quickly, Sam. What is shadow banning?
Shadow banning... Okay, so I don't like playing this stupid semantics game. I think it's all a form of censorship. I mean, you are... Well, so the technical... I'm not sure if I could give the technical term, but it's something like you are not... Your reach, as far as your post in Twitter, is not reaching as many people as you think it is. And so you're sort of banned, but you don't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
Something along those lines.
Yep.
But essentially, it all could be thrown in the bucket of censorship. And you get people that just infuriate me when they come up and they're like, well, it's not really censoring. It's like deplatforming or I forgot these other terms. It's like you are putting your thumb on the scale, which more or less quiets your voice and limits your reach. That is a form of censoring. So anyway, the FBI on several instances particularly would communicate to Twitter. They had a long-lasting relationship, several years that Twitter and the FBI communicated and became friends, and several requests to Twitter to take action on certain people for violating of terms and service and spreading of quote unquote misinformation.
Right.
Well, I think so. I was trying to think like what could somebody say about that? How could somebody really defend that? I mean, just some random person maybe try their best to defend it. I don't know, Mike, you could tell me what you think about this, but it's like they could say, well, Twitter is set up to where they rely on tips to enforce their terms of service because you can't look through every single tweet. So the FBI is like helping, just this, helping Twitter do this sort of stuff. And I think that's well, first of all, so wrong. If it's like me or you, I think that would be fine. But the fact that it comes from the government, the fact that it comes from them,
right,
is the line that they crossed. Because they are supposed to uphold the Constitution and everything it stands for, and they are in fact infringing on your First Amendment. They are limiting the speech of certain people, and whether you like it or not, at that time and probably now, Twitter is the public square, if not part of the public square. So 100% they were doing that. They are not your friends. And in fact, they even took legal action on some people for spreading misinformation. So imagine you sent, some of these were jokes, by the way. So imagine you send a joke on Twitter claiming something about the election, maybe the time of the election or something like that. And the FBI sends a request to Twitter to say, give me all the information, including location information that you have on this person, because we're going to follow up with legal action. Essentially, taking legal action on people for lying. I mean, I don't know how else to really put that other than, yeah, you could probably go onto Twitter and spread lies. But that is now against the law. So that was a big finding. The next sort of big one for me was the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story, like Kyle had mentioned earlier. And the timeline on this is real shady, real wonky, because the FBI actually knew about the laptop missing out of Hunter Biden's hands probably a year in advance. they knew about it. Now, maybe it's negligence. Maybe it just kind of got lost somewhere in the paperwork and they didn't kind of figure it out. But about a month before the New York Post dropped the article, which was like in mid-October, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe early.
So in September, the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies, to be honest, I'm not, as I'm trying to remember, I don't know which one sort of led the exercise. It could have been the FBI. But anyway, I'm lumping them all into intelligence community. They led like this tabletop exercise where they said, okay, they got together a bunch of big tech executives or big tech legal people, maybe probably news media people as well, and said, okay, here, we're going to run through an exercise, and we're going to call it the Burisma Hunter Biden leak or something like that. Eerily similar to what was about to happen in a month's time. And they had a play-by-play breakdown. You can find all of this in Twitter file. I believe it's number 7. You can see they sent the I think it's the FBI. They sent Twitter like a summary of all the things that they were going to go over, and it was like day 1, this leak occurs on some small fringe media source. Nothing happens. Day 2, it gets picked up by bigger people. It starts getting circulated. The Washington Post reports on it. Day 3, we have to start. It was just a day by day. This is what's going to happen. This is how we're going to respond. And they essentially, in talking with these heads of industry, these heads of big tech and media, they kind of primed them into thinking that this is going to be a hack and leak operation. So these are hacked materials, and it's just going to be leaking for some nefarious reason. Who knows? And this is how we are going to combat it. And this is, the proof of this is Yoel Roth, who we've talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
He's pretty high up in the Twitter file space, or Twitter space. In a sworn statement, I think it probably a deposition or something, he had mentioned that they had met with FBI officials months in advance to go over a hack and leak operation. So not only did he, and by the way, there's no reason for anybody to say, well, he was just kind of lying there, because why would you lie and give yourself a bad look in that lie? So it's like, okay, and so we became pretty confident that was correct. Also, in internal communications, when the story dropped mid-October or so, Yoel Roth was on record in one of the Slack channels, or maybe email, I can't remember, saying something like, oh yeah, this kind of looks similar to what a hack and leak operation might look like. And they use the same verbiage. So it's 100% the intelligence community, FBI, DHS, they got with Twitter before the laptop story even dropped and said, hey, something might happen in the future. It's going to look like this, and it's a hack and leak operation. It's a bunch of nefarious people doing shady things, and this is how we're going to cover it. And that's like exactly what happened later. So either they knew that it was going to be leaked. Well, like I said before, they had it a month in advance. They had a year in advance. They knew the laptop was missing a year in advance. Or like they how else can you explain it? Of course, they knew what was going to happen. And so the relationship between the intelligence community and Twitter, it paints this picture that they are not your friends. They are, at best, you may never get any interactions with them, but in the course, if none of this was revealed, then it could very well have ended up to be where you could say the wrong thing online and then get a knock on your door from the FBI or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it's very nefarious. There was another thing. Well, I'll let Mike get into it, but there was a there's this weird triad, this weird relationship between the intelligence community, like talking with Twitter, but they're not just saying, hey, Twitter, you need to do this sort of stuff and we're going to try and suppress people's free speech. They're also saying, hey, look, according to this research, this is how we need to respond. And the research there, Mike, you can talk about this, but the research there is also very, very shady and shoddy, let's say.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, on that point, Sam, you make a couple good points that I want to drill down just very quickly. Yeah. One, yes, there was this tabletop exercise, which is just remarkable coincidence if it were coincidence. And again, it's not even that you have to think that there's some like grand cabal or conspiracy. It's just a matter of historical fact that it did happen. It happened at least with Twitter and Facebook. We have evidence from primary sources on both of those. And it's just, again, because we're not trying to make this as a partisan point, saying something like, oh, the election outcome should have been different or would have been different. I don't necessarily believe either of those things. But the principle here is, why is the intelligence community aiming its proverbial guns on citizens and their exercise of free speech? And yes, you asked something earlier like, oh, okay, well, maybe Twitter can high grade how it moderates its content by getting tips. Well, at the very least, what you should expect from your government is that if Special Agent Lewis at the FBI puts a call out to Twitter saying user Samuel Vernon 01 seems to be, violating, pick your favorite topic that you'd violate to talk about, and we think it's in violation of your terms of service. It's like, well, what would happen if the FBI emailed us and was like, hey, your podcasts, they seem to be running, or better yet, they emailed our web hosting service and they're like, we think this podcasting network might be violative of your terms of service. I would be upset if the web hosting service booted us off, but I would understand why that pressure would seem like a tacit threat.
Yeah. Well, what about this? I was kind of thinking of analogies a little while ago too. I was like, what if they contacted your local police and said, hey, one of our satellites picked up Michael Lewis's car driving over the speed limit through this intersection. You might want to go give him a visit. It's like, the fuck is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, we will probably be swearing in this live stream.
Pardon my language.
Cool. So yes, there's just something that doesn't sit right. But more than that, what didn't sit right with me was the this kind of triad Sam was talking about. And I didn't focus so much on, you could probably make it a 4-player system between Twitter and law enforcement, as he's laid out, or social media companies and law enforcement, and then as well as researchers. But there's another player here, which is the news media. So I focused primarily on the social media, news media, researcher triad. But the reason there's so much overlap between the news media and intel community, and actually between the other two players as well, is just look at where these alumni go. It's like if someone retires who's a relatively public figure in an intelligence position, where are they going? They're going to news organizations to be, John Brennan, formerly of the CIA, and or James Clapper. It's like these people some of whom lied to Congress, are getting high-profile positions now, telling you that they're authoritative voices on what constitutes, maladies in the information sphere. And
yeah, I think maybe after you get done talking about your section, we should talk about this circle of influence that sort of just goes around and around. Mm-hmm. And well, I'll just leave it there. Maybe we can discuss about that, because it's eye-opening, I think.
Yep. All right, so we'll go ahead and I'm going to talk about the news media just for a quick second. So this, I'm typically talking about legacy media, which I classify as kind of like organizational media as opposed to personality-centered media that's not digitally native. And like I said, they're often staffed by these former intel officials, but what they'll also do is they'll serve as amplifiers of particular research findings. And this is something that, working in social science, I've really struggled with, because for a while it just didn't click that, well, maybe they're doing it intentionally, or maybe they just don't have the faculties to be able to evaluate good research versus poor research. So what you'll see is a selection bias in terms of what research gets covered and a framing bias in terms of how they cover particular research. So in the Twitter files, we see some of this with respect to how the legacy media amplifies research that is negative about social media companies. And it's not that there's not anything to criticize about the social media companies. There's good research, for example, that social media use, especially in young people, but particularly young girls, causes higher levels of poor psychological outcomes, high anxiety, high depression, that kind of stuff.
Neuroticism.
Yeah, well, yes, yeah, that probably predisposes people to that, select people to that, yes, to be sure. But that's just sensitivity to negative emotion. That's the technical definition of that personality trait. For those who think we're like throwing a pejorative around, like,
well, would you say that it like capitalizes on that or amplifies it, or?
Yeah, like it's acting on that, right? Yeah, so it's kind of like picking at that scab, kind of, or that, like, just like if you have, if you're obsessive compulsive, there's some things that might, pull you in that direction, essentially, online. And so it just happens to be that the current form of social media, especially the highly visual forms of social media, can make people who are predisposed to high negative emotion or have physical insecurities, for example, it can, as you said, amplify those things. And so there's plenty of like good research and there's some evidence even that Facebook and or Instagram had some information that this might be what they were doing early on, and there have been some whistleblowers to that end of various, let's say, philosophical backgrounds. So there's plenty to criticize, but then this complex that's come up around, by the way, this is our government defining under the Department of Homeland Security under something called CISA, C-I-S-A. I think it's the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency or something like that. They have this thing called MDM, and they may have updated their website since, but what was malinformation, misinformation, and disinformation? Misinformation is false information that could mislead people. Disinformation was intentionally false information that could mislead people, even though they didn't define it correctly on their website. And then malinformation is essentially true information that could result in a bad outcome. So if you want the government deciding what true information that they can decide results in a bad outcome, then, be my guest. But as far as I'm concerned, that's well beyond the pale. In any case, so these news media players will often amplify these type of things. And one thing that's kind of fallen under this umbrella since the phenomenon of Trump, or the phenomena of Trump, there's probably several aspects here, but is this whole like through line of any sort of thing that sounds remotely populist, whether it's right wing or left wing, whether it's Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, is a function of Russian influence. And the answer is like, well, no, the hell it's not. And also, Russian influence seeks to destabilize. And this lumping of anyone you disagree with ideologically as some malign foreign actor helps them achieve that. So if we're really talking about what's divisive and harming the country, it's probably more that than people expressing genuine opinions, even whether they're misguided or on the mark. So again, what the news media will do is they'll act as amplifiers for select types of research, and this is where it gets really pernicious, because we'll talk about Hamilton 68, which is Relationship 100, here in just a moment. Essentially, the way research happens on a lot of these social media sites is they'll have something called an API. Just think about this as like a pipeline by which you can request certain data from Twitter, and those data will be provided to you, subject to you meeting certain criteria and being approved. And this has since changed, actually, in the last couple of weeks since Elon took over. There's now a paid service that's way more throttled, and many people are upset, understandably so. But in any case, you have these what are called APIs that allow you to kind of pipe into Twitter's data and receive some of it back to you for you to perform some sort of research. Well, what happened was that this group formed a dashboard under the Alliance Securing Democracy, which we'll talk about in just a second, right? 3-letter acronym, ASD. We've never had any 3-letter acronyms act nefariously that sound nice. CIA, DHS, FBI, whatever. So the Alliance Securing Democracy, at least some of the people associated with it helped develop this dashboard. And what it claimed to do was track over 600 like Russian or bot accounts on Twitter, and that they were able to track kind of what the Kremlin, for lack of a better term, is pushing out as a narrative on social media. Well, the problem is that when Matt Taibbi and crew started digging into the Twitter files, they came across this Hamilton 68 issue, and what they discovered was that not only were they kind of skeptical of its claims, but that Twitter, under the old leadership, was skeptical of its claims. What Twitter did, likely by reverse engineering the users that were included in this 600, and I think it was 44 users that were being tracked, they probably just reversed the API calls and were able to see who these people were. There's no reason to suspect that third parties like the people at ASD had more information on Hamilton, on the folks in this dashboard than Twitter did. And Twitter found that most of these people were genuine users who were neither bots nor Russian affiliated, and that they were something like, tended to be conservative. They amplified stuff in the conservative space. So it's nonsense. And the word, I think it was Yoel Roth actually used, was biased, is that they know that essentially, okay, this stuff that is being caught up in the press, and there's dozens of press articles, praising Hamilton 68 and saying that, oh, look, this trending topic that happened to cut in favor of conservatives is being amplified by Russians on the basis of this research that was this dashboard. Well, that was nonsense. Now, this got amplified by people in legacy media, all the way from Washington Post to Politico. Ivy League institutions were amplifying this, and it's let's say, what would you call it?
Can I ask a question, Mike?
Uh-huh.
So would it be fair? Well, okay, let me just play devil's advocate for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that there's never been Russian bots to influence anything or like attacking? So
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
The issue is that, and I hope we can get into this later with something currently on the docket before Congress, which is the Restrict Act, but because of certain technological exploits and pieces of software, it can make pinning down the actual nature of a social media user very hard. But there is evidence that there were Russian affiliated / sponsored bot farms in the lead up to the 2016 election as well as Brexit. It is not obvious to me, let's say, that those are, unabashedly pro-Brexit and pro-Trump as much as they were trying to just be destabilizing generally. So, in any case, that I hope that answers your question. Yes, there's genuine. There was even some genuine Russian accounts in this list of 600. It's just the case that it was not the majority of them.
Would it be fair to say that, okay, if you have used the argument against somebody, or if you've heard it from somebody claiming that, well, that's nonsense because it's all just Russian bots, you're likely to have been misled?
Oh, that's a great question. It depends on who you're talking to, I suspect. I don't think...
Well, because I say that because as I think back through the news stories throughout Trump's administration, a lot of the arguments where this is just Russian bots or this is Russian disinformation. And it sounds like what you're saying is, okay, every time I heard that from either a news outlet or could be an individual, it's likely that they were misled, and they were misled, I guess is probably the nicest way to put it.
I think that you're being generous to the people reporting.
Yes.
I think that they were complicit in this because they weren't skeptical enough. This is something that could have been known had they wanted to know, that stuff like Hamilton 68 was mostly nonsense. I mean, for example, you have these House reps here, 2 of the 3 that I've listed, and there were more, are Democrats, but that one in the middle, he's a Republican senator, or no. Yeah, he's actually a senator, so I shouldn't have put him with the House reps, but he's from Oklahoma. And in any case, so this was like a bipartisan issue and remains that way in terms of the trying to thwart Russian influence. And I don't want Russian influence in our elections. I'm just also a grown-up and know that major powers try and meddle in each other's elections. Not that I excuse that, certainly not. But the class of quote-unquote disinformation experts we've inherited are totally falling short on the job. And they're not even remotely preparing us for what comes next with deep fakes and the like.
Can we just get rid of disinformation expert? Like, what the
Yeah, it's a made up
F is
title,
that?
right? Yeah,
Yes.
as Michael Schellenberger put it on Rogan the other day. Essentially, it's like, oh, I'm an expert in truth. Like, oh, how funny is that? Just generally truth. Like you can just
Yeah.
yeah.
How convenient.
Yes, yeah, it's exactly. So no, they have generally no expertise, or their expertise is goes beyond the measure. Now, I will say that there's, I am getting a PhD studying fake news, so I don't know what that means, other than maybe don't do a PhD, but
It means you're getting a fake PhD.
well, most PhDs are fake. The nature of things is such that I
How many have
promise,
you tried to get, Mike?
huh? None so
How many
far.
have?
This is the first
Just
time
the
I've tried to
one.
get.
No. Attempted to get.
I've only attempted to get one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. You're talking about because I've been a part of 2 PhD programs, but
Oh, okay.
I walked away from the other one. Yes.
That was a bad relationship. You
No,
really
no, it was
dodged the
not.
bullet.
I don't want to say that because that lab was
Oh,
actually excellent. It's just that I couldn't see the form of applied science that they're doing continuing to get funding if they didn't focus on certain species of fish. So it's a very different prior life.
What was Kyle? What was the joke that Mike is the
Mike is the
Ross
Ross
Geller?
of Ross Geller of PhDs because the joke was Ross had many marriages
And
and
I've pursued many
yeah.
PhDs. Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that this one is going to pan out. I'm close enough anyway. But the point is, like, so I could try and parlay what I'm doing into being like a disinformation expert, but I'm so unimpressed generally by my would-be colleagues that I wouldn't do that. There are some, but having said that, there are people. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. There are people who are doing good research in this information space, but they're very narrow in their focus, which is appropriate. But the problem again is that the media will take something narrow and generalize it as if the entire phenomenon had been studied. And I talked to probably the most prominent researcher, or one of the 2 most prominent researchers, a guy named David Rand. He had been amplified by some third-party account saying, "Oh, look at this great research he's done," and it was good research. And I asked, hey, is the fact that you ground all of your research on fact checks and that there's low reliability between fact checkers and low consistency essentially across fact checkers, and that there's a necessary editorial decision in choosing what to fact check, is that a threat to, kind of like the generalizability of your findings? And he goes, yeah, for sure. And it's like, well, okay, so I don't fault him for that because he's being a good scientist, conducting good research with his colleagues, and he's also being an honest communicator of that science. That is not what the news media is doing. So let's get back to the Hamilton 68 thing, because this is really where my blood begins to boil. And this has not gotten better, by the way, in the time since Twitter File 15 came out. I think at least 2 of the next ones were kind of around this topic. So again, Alliance for Securing Democracy, as we mentioned. So here's a couple of the early members. I believe one of them, the gentleman on the left, his name is John Podesta. You may know him from running the Hillary Clinton campaign. The guy on the right is Jake Sullivan. He was going to be Hillary Clinton's top, I believe, foreign policy advisor. He is now that for Joe Biden. So you're kind of getting a picture here. And then, okay, they'll say it's a bipartisan venture. Well, here's a couple examples of the bipartisan nature. There's Bill Kristol in the top left there, who's a neocon from the Bush era. And I don't use neocon pejoratively. It's an accurate description. He has been allowed back into polite society because of his boisterous criticism of Trump. And, I cannot remember this gentleman's name in the bottom right. Give me one moment. I'm going to find it. It is David Kramer. And so he's a public policy director and undersecretary under Bush. And you might think, okay, well, that's fine. They're just taking Bush-era Republicans. But he's the one who leaked the Steele dossier to BuzzFeed. And for those who are not aware, the Steele dossier is now pretty much verifiably established as opposition research that is mostly false, if not completely false, paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign, misclassified as a campaign legal expense. That was settled almost exactly last year, like 1 year and 3 days ago in court, which might be relevant given some of the current legal issues surrounding presidential candidates misfiling expenses. Anyway, so
did she get indicted?
No, she had to agree to I think she agreed to like a settlement payment. There's an article in like Forbes or Politico about it from March 31st, 2022. So this is kind of the Alliance for Securing Democracy. So this is the group telling you, and you can make whatever you want of this, but this is the group kind of, helping to fund projects like Hamilton 68. Now, here's something else. This is from the New York Times, and there's a similar post or article rather in the Washington Post. So from the New York Times, there's the secret experiment in the Alabama Senate race. So if you remember back in 2018, there was a contested Senate race in Alabama, which is kind of weird, right? Because it's pretty deep red, Republican country. But what had happened was Jeff Sessions had been appointed Attorney General by Donald Trump, so his, Senator Sessions then became, AG elect Sessions, and so there needed to be someone to fill his spot in the Senate. Well, the Republicans nominated someone named Roy Moore, who has colorful history to say the least, but he was kind of a handpicked selection of like the Steve Bannon types on the right, and what was found was that the Democrats who ended up winning, by the way, because so many Republicans voted cross-ticket or just didn't vote for the Republican candidate because of, again, that kind of colorful past. But what the Democrats were doing in this race is they were shown to be creating fake Russian accounts to try and make it look like Russians were amplifying Roy Moore. So, I wonder if I've typed that in wrong. I think it was Roy Moore, not Roy Jones. Anyway, so you can see here that here's a snippet or a couple snippets from there. We orchestrated an elaborate false flag operation that planted the idea that the Moore campaign was amplified on social media by a Russian botnet, the report says. And then you kind of read down and you see this person, Renee DiResta, and this company, New Knowledge, who was kind of consulting with this campaign, the New Knowledge, not necessarily DiResta, and had this going on. Well, Renee DiResta comes up in a lot of places. Now, I'm not going to go so far as Michael Schellenberger has recently. He and Renee have had a bit of a falling out. I think Renee is probably more like a Yoel Roth character, where there's things where there's instances where they stand on principle, but when it comes that inflection point, when that singular moment comes where you have to like stand and take the position that's unpopular, it's questionable at best. And some people would say she's more of a malign actor. She's featured prominently in the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. She kind of got her start by studying some of these original Russian bot farms, actually from the 2015-2016 cycle. But let's see here. That's not great. Let's see if it's
that may have been just the slide is not brought to the front, so it might be pulling in.
No worries. We'll just go to
the effect.
Way to go, guys.
I'll have to get with our chief content officer.
I did not finish my PhD, and that's what happened.
All right, stay in school, kids. So so essentially here's what we do. So one thing you'll notice in the Twitter files is there's this frequent mention of some of these high-profile universities, including Stanford. And Stanford has this thing called SIO, Stanford Internet Observatory, and they've been involved in a lot of different quote-unquote studying of disinformation or stuff to, studying things to destabilize elections or around COVID conspiracies. And so you'll see here is her giving a shout-out to Hamilton 68 in 2017. And essentially, it's like, look, we've all had bad tweets. I'm not like mining people's social media history to make a point about her generally. I am just saying that, like everyone else, she, as a quote-unquote disinformation expert, and take that however you'd like, she is susceptible to confirmation bias and being unscrupulous too. And that's me being generous, because some people would say that, no, she should have or she did know better, or that the way she and her colleagues studied things was not meaningfully different than how Hamilton 68 studied theirs. You can also see something she wrote in a blog post, essentially, and I think I verified this is her, essentially following the election of Donald Trump, essentially saying this, hashtag resist movement, which, was like, if that's how you feel, fine. For me, it was kind of like cringy to see people in the research setting be advocating for this kind of stuff. So anyway, this is kind of like the cadre of individuals that you empower when you say, like, we're going to quote unquote follow the science on disinformation. You're not listening to the David Rands and the Gordon Pennycooks of the world. You're listening to folks like this. That's typically, in terms of like being discerning, they'll take, what some of the actual good researchers are doing, and they'll selectively interpret it, or they'll bastardize it beyond recognition, and they'll amplify that, or they'll just allow for these mouthpieces that you see here to proliferate. And is there any reason to believe that they're better actors on average than, people who are generally on the right, or who are on the, socialist left, or who are just centrist? The answer is no. I don't think there's any basis for saying that these people should have, authority over what you can and cannot say, or that they have some secret insight that others do not have. So anyway, I'll go back to this main slide here, and then we'll just close out this PowerPoint and just go freeform. What you can do is, when you get this visualization, you can scroll through the PowerPoint, or you can just jump around by clicking on the different bubbles. Like I said, there will be a partner database that speaks to some of these relationships up here. These are kind of the primary keys for the relationships table for those of you who are database oriented. And again, this is a prototype. This is not the final version, and we would likely need to crowdsource it in order to always be able to maintain an up-to-date version. And maybe we'll do that. But the reason you'd want to do that, by the way, is so that people can start to study this in an analysis-ready fashion. Because a lot of the effort that goes into making social media data studyable is driven by an agenda. And I hope, as I've demonstrated here, you should always take a critical lens and be discerning when trying to read results and parse that from any sort of agenda that was built in.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, why don't we go, I want to do a super high level takeaway,
Sure.
your main takeaway from the Twitter files, because we've sifted through this junk for I don't know how many weeks now.
3.5 months.
So Kyle, what's the big takeaway that you have? If you could sum it up, a few sentences.
From the entire files?
Yeah, the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of pressure. So if I could sum it up, there seems to have been a lot of pressure done given from whether it be the FBI or certain, I'm going to say even politicians, but certain administrations, and it goes both ways too. I mean, the Trump administration wasn't completely, they had their hand in some things as well, saying, hey, can we just not, what do you want to do about this? So, and there's evidence of that. I think that, so my takeaway is that, there's a lot of evidence of Twitter executives basically trying to appease those in power to either cover up certain things or to shadow ban and in a sense put a mask over those who are trying to speak freely.
Yeah, for me, I would say my biggest one, actually, it kind of jumps off of Mike, a lot of stuff that you talked about, because the biggest thing for me was looking at all of this and just coming to the conclusion of man, you really can't trust, because someone says, well, we're going to follow the science. And you'd think, most people would like to think to themselves okay, yep, science, that's a good thing to follow, to understand, and to kind of get behind. Mm-hmm. But you really can't. The Twitter, everything that's come out of the Twitter files has just led me to believe that you really cannot trust this stuff that any of these people are saying, whether it is people that supposedly are supposed to be for America's interests, like the intelligence community, or even if you think it's read, it's stated in a terms of service, you can't trust them. Or even if it news outlets are all reporting on the same thing, it's very difficult for me anyway, to read all that and to trust it. And so I would say, don't trust, verify.
Don't trust.
And
verify, yeah.
Part of mine too is if you follow the money, look at how much of internal Twitter employees, how much they donate, or how much of donations went to either political party. It was 90% went to Democratic or to the leftist parties. And it's just well, then why would I trust? I mean, why would I trust it to not lean one way or the other?
Yeah, well, because they would always they just claimed oh no, we're bipartisan. Yeah, and if you go back and watch, Mike had talked about that Joe Rogan episode where it was Vijaya Gotti and Jack Dorsey sitting down with Tim Pool. They were oh, we're not partisans. We listen to both people on both sides. Blah blah blah. It's really, you more than half, the majority of your company donated to a particular political party. Are you telling me that your company and all of its code and all of its lines of content is not biased in one direction? Come on.
Well, it's not even so much that, for those who are on here, I know that I've got some former students and some colleagues in other spaces on here. Like a for loop is a for loop. It doesn't matter whether a communist writes it or a rock rib conservative writes it. It should execute the same way. But in terms of what's the systems you're designing and the way you're penalizing, or tuning a loss function for an algorithm, those are not. You don't get those de novo. Like those don't emerge from nothing. You have to quantify at some point. And so go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, if I understood you correctly, you just said like code is code, right? And so like it's written one way, and that's the way it's gonna
Right.
be.
Republicans don't write well. The tools that are available to Democrats are available to Republicans. So like you can build anything as either.
Yes, correct. But as Kyle brought up in his topic was like, it seems so subjective that how they apply their terms of service.
Right, but that's not a code. That's not. So what we've found, like, I don't think the algorithm, quote unquote, there are certain forms, like you can think about the misgendering type thing for particular trending topics historically. That has been code enforced, and it is embedded in it a political position. Whether Vijaya acknowledges it or not, it is factually the case that it did. But in terms of like that code, the code is neutral. Like it's, as one of our
for sure.
said, it's
I don't disagree.
But the algorithm that's where any sort of partiality comes in is at the human level. And so if you say something like we did an audit, because you have audits for where employees for companies donate, and this is, by the way, in the flat file version of the database we'll release because it was highlighted in Twitter files, but this is publicly available data. So it's auditable. It's something like between 55 and 60 to 1 in terms of Democrat to Republican donations. So like there's not even the pretense of balance. Now look, I don't really care whether a company does all one way or the other, but like no one is saying that Gab or Truth Social or Parler or even Rumble is politically agnostic. Now Rumble is saying something like we embrace free speech, but they've built their original political section around conservatives who couldn't express outlet, their stuff elsewhere. But there's not this gaslighting that goes on. And I would say that that's kind of like, for me, the biggest takeaway from the Twitter files is around that gaslighting, which is not like it's not that you have to be skeptical of all the science. It's just you have to be, and not that you can just do your own research, because there are domains that require like special knowledge and years of training. Those tend to be like, very applied, or very, very applied as in like cardiovascular surgery, or very basic in terms of science, in terms of like particle physics. But at the same time, a lot of the social science stuff, a relatively well-informed person who is just an engineer, let's say, no offense, Sam, you could pick up this paper, and if you can get through all the kind of this masturbatory exercise of academic jargon, you can like get to the results and you can understand what the hell they're saying. But the thing is, it's time. And so what the news media had traditionally done, what science communicators had traditionally done, was, distill that down into like what mattered and what you should focus on. And unfortunately, I think that so many of our institutions today, this is my takeaway, is they're not worth your trust. I'm not saying that that's good or that I want that. I don't. I wish they were. And I'm not saying you should quit listening to them at all. I'm saying you should listen to them, but you shouldn't only listen to them. And I can't say it any better than that. If you're interested, you can see this tension battled out between Douglas Murray and Matt Taibbi, roughly 1 month before Matt Taibbi began the Twitter files, as they debate Michelle Goldberg of the New York Times and Malcolm Gladwell in a Monk debate from late last year. Highly
What was that on? What was that on?
Monk debates.
No. The topic. What was the debate?
Oh, the debate was on be it resolved, you cannot trust the mainstream media.
Yeah. That one. I remember seeing that. That was a good one.
Yeah. All right. So we have a question from Sarah. It says, how do we know if Twitter is headed in a transparent, trustworthy direction under new leadership? Do you know of any new policies in place? So do either you want to take that one?
I don't know of any new wait, new policies. Hang on. I mean, I only know maybe what Elon Musk had maybe tweeted. So actually to verify if the policy is there, no idea. But I think he expanded a lot of the free speech rules, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Things that you like previously could not say he then allowed.
Yeah, so there's less ideological enforcement of a certain kind, but it's not this free speech haven that he claimed it would be.
Correct.
There are people who've still not been reinstated, and I'm not arguing for or against that. It's just, again, a statement of fact. In terms of new policies, there is the ability to pay for Twitter Blue, and then you are verified in the same way that people who were, blue check users previously were. So you have access to kind of greater features and affordances through the platform, and more reach as an example. So that's been good, but not without hiccups, because people started impersonating they impersonated Elon, for example, as kind of like a thumbing their nose at him. I think someone impersonated Eli Lilly, which is, I think, a pharma company, and they said, starting tomorrow, we're giving away insulin for free or something to that effect. And their stock went way down for a day, So like people, like, you're panicking about this stuff, but that stuff gets worked out. And so that's one example of a new policy. Another new thing that they did was they open sourced the code for at least certain aspects of Twitter's code this past weekend. So that's available on GitHub I know we have one Microsoft person online.
Do you know like what part of the code was open sourced?
I think it has something to do with the ranking algorithm or the newsfeed algorithm, but I haven't looked at it. I've looked at a couple screenshots of it. I haven't investigated it deeply. So those are just a couple. I think that stuff is more transparent. Certainly, like, that's a more transparent verification process rather than Twitter gets to say, okay, you're important enough for us to verify your identity, right? Which turned actually was just like kind of social and political favors to people. Now, there's downsides to that too, right? Because like anyone can get verified. You could be a picture of a cat in your profile, and like, who the hell are you? But so those moves are transparent. He goes and he's working late nights with some of these teams, out in San Francisco. So he's there. He has skin in the game. Let's put it that way. He has $44 billion of skin in the game. And I get the impression he does care about it, but people will criticize inconsistencies, and hey, fair enough. But it's far less inconsistent than the previous leadership, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's going in a better direction. Probably it may not even be going in the direction that I personally want, but I think it's a better direction just by the fact that he released a lot of internal stuff and allowed journalists to come in and just report on the inner workings of the previous team, let's say. So I think that's already a step in the right direction. So that's my opinion.
Well, he's adding more transparency, so that way there's no there's no theories that we have to create. It's like, okay, here's the open book, making the source code available. It's like, here we're making things more transparent, so that way if you do have any questions or you do want a question, you can just go look at it yourself. Of course, I won't know what.
Yeah. Subject again. This goes back to like having the knowledge, right? Because you could see a situation where someone says, okay, well, now this greater availability of information, I can selectively pick and choose things to kind of create my own narrative, and for people who are either too busy or unqualified, they cannot go in and verify this for themselves, so they're just taking my word for it. So I think that you need to find, again, it's okay to listen to kind of legacy media on this stuff, but you need to find some trusted voices kind of from a variety of perspectives, so that you reduce the likelihood of falling prey to a lie that is maliciously motivated. But are you
saying don't trust, verify?
Well, don't trust. I mean, to the extent you can verify, I would say don't trust, verify, and if you can't verify, make sure you're diversified.
Yeah, because I can go look at that source code and be like, cool, commas, semicolons, that looks great.
Right.
But then Mike might look at it and be like, hey, they cleaned up this is not as biased as the old one. I'm like, cool.
There's more. You don't, to verify, you don't have to know code.
Well, you do if you're going to audit a piece of code.
Yeah. Well, yes, but no, that's for sure. But there's other means. The internet sleuths out there. Yeah, I feel like the truth. As soon as you put something as open code, I think the truth will come out.
Yeah,
maybe.
But you have to trust those sources though, because they might just try and pull the wool over your eyes, like, see, it's not that bad, and just sell it to you. And I think that's kind of like the big takeaway is, yes, trust but verify, but also being able to think for ourselves. And I see that happen a lot where people just take others' words for it. Now, this whole issue of trust gets brought up. I think from an organizational standpoint, Twitter has lost the trust of a lot of people, as it should have. I think it should have. And this is a part of that rebuilding phase of, okay, from an organizational, but also from a market perspective, they need to rebuild trust. That's going to take time. As trust goes down, the timing, the speed goes down as well, and that rises the cost of everything. So in order for it to get one thing done, for us to verify something because we don't trust Twitter, think about how much time it took for us 3 months to go through and look at something. How much time, and if you want to put the dollar sign to it, how much money did that cost for a third? Like, I guess we could be a third party, but a group, an independent group to go through and understand. So you look at how all that ties together. But yeah, Twitter's, they're going to have to go through a big kind of regaining the trust of the market, and organizationally, you got people who don't trust each other internally as well now. So
Well,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know about the internal dynamics because there's been such a reduction in the workforce. I don't know. You know, it's tough to say whether he got that right or wrong in terms of did he keep the right people. I'm sure that there's type 1 and type 2 errors in both directions, but
It does seem though that he is sexist because now all of his employees are like all the females or everyone that left was female, right?
well, there was that one picture that went around where it was like a predominantly female team that like had gotten let go, and there was a predominantly male team that he was working with like late one night. But that's I haven't seen any like empirical evidence other than those two cases. But yeah,
Well, what teams were they? If it's like if it was like the HR team, yes, they tend to be, yeah.
The joke was like Elon came in and said, "Hey, we're gonna all work." Well, okay, so back up. You know, you saw that day in the life of a Twitter employee video where it's just like, "Hi, I get to work at whatever time,
right.
and I drink a latte in the morning, and then I go do yoga for 30 minutes, and then like she goes throughout her day, and she's only done like maybe an hour and a half of like meeting work." You know, maybe, but it certainly seems like the majority of her day was not working. And then Elon Musk comes in and says, "Hey, we're going to work really hard and pretty much work long hours. And if you're not into that, I'll pay you, a certain severance package, and then see you later." And then the workforce that stayed were all men. Well, maybe not all, but anyway, the joke is that
right. Well,
he's sexist because
it's all reasoning from cases, right? Like, okay, like for example, I saw those videos too. I think there's 2 of them that went around, and it's like, okay, well, those are like 2 relatively associate level members of the Twitter team who probably were not kept in the reduction in workforce. But just because one code team is predominantly male doesn't mean that another one is doesn't cut the other direction. So I don't know. I mean, I think that we got a comment that says he doesn't seem like he thinks things through, which maybe on the $44 billion for a company that's worth like 9 or whatever it is, maybe on that front. But I don't know. I think the reduction in workforce that we're seeing with Twitter is like, I think that was more of a leading indicator of kind of tech and the bloat that happened following.
Well, you saw that like Amazon and Facebook, they all let people off. Yeah. So maybe Twitter just went ahead of the game and was just like, all right, well, we got to reduce.
In terms of relative cuts, theirs were much steeper and much more immediate, but it's not clear where things are going to shake out, or that the relative employment levels versus the amount of software being produced are going to be meaningfully different, 18 months from now between these major tech companies. I don't know. I hope not, because I've got friends who work in tech, but also like he's an engineer by trade. So like the idea of like, lean process and lean manufacturing is like, I'm sure built in. And, I heard a professor describe once, they were asked like, what do you think about Elon taking over Twitter? This is maybe April last year. So it's kind of still rumor stage. And he goes, first thing I want to say is I really like Elon for electric cars, for solar power, and for reusable rockets. But I'm not sure he's the right guy for free speech. And it's like, well, first of all, there's not a right guy or for social media content moderation. It's like there's not a right guy or a right gal for that. That's not something that one person gets to decide. But second of all, it's also like, with respect, like you're a relatively high-profile professor, fair enough, but who the hell are you? Like, how many companies like this have you built? So I don't know. I mean,
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, he does seem to fire from the hip a lot. One thing that you can do with software is you can revise it. So a lot of those policies changes that get reflected in software can be revisited. So a lot of people have this negative view of the move fast and break things culture of Silicon Valley. I think it's kind of like a time and place thing. Like there's times where it's good and relevant, and maybe when you're testing new features on a social media platform, that's one of them. It's just that everything is so heightened now, right? It's a political act to change the Twitter policies. It's like, why is that the case? Well, that's the case. It's not the case because of Elon. That was the case long before he got there.
And that was the case after the 2016 election. They said we'll make sure policies are in place so that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, that was a very weird thing, right? That came out where it's
Yeah.
like, what do you mean by this doesn't happen again? Because that happened at a few different companies, and it's like, okay, to the extent you mean like you're gonna be more diligent in policing like actual content that's bad, fine, or like not bad, but like that's actually like genuine foreign influence, fine, but like that does just like deputize people to say, well, this is foreign influence and therefore take it off, right? Which is kind of what we saw unfold.
Well, it's like I always think about like if you work for a company and they have like phishing, or like phishing, what do they call it, campaigns. It's like, well, I'm just going to classify everything as phishing because everything looks like phishing. And so you don't really drill down on like what does a phishing email really look like. And now you got a bunch of real emails that go sent to the cybersecurity department. Like, well, these are real emails, but people are just conditioned to be like, oh, well, that's Russian disinformation, or that's this, or that's that, and then they flag it, and then next thing you know, you got this downward spiral of content that just it shouldn't be flagged.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's an inflation in terms of the maladies in the information context, unfortunately, because you actually, like, I'm not in principle against the term disinformation. Like, I think that could actually be an accurate label, but I don't trust anyone who uses that as their calling card. If you say like there's a class of information that is, I lie to you in order to manipulate and mislead you, like I think that happens. I do think that is an objective thing that exists in the world. I just don't trust anyone who says that that's my job is to spot that.
Yeah, I have serious distrust when I hear those words because I feel like they're buzzwords. I mean, lately there's been a lot of words that crop up that are like they kind of sound okay to use, and you kind of get in a sense of what it might mean, but it's got some nefarious meaning behind it.
Right.
And I think people are only wise to it a bit later. So I don't like those terms. That malinformation, misinformation, disinformation, all that stuff. I get that it has different meaning, but I'm very skeptical when people start using it.
Yeah.
It's like that in Inigo Montoya. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we do have another question coming in. Do you think Twitter has affected human behavior as it relates to how we convey and consume media? So few people are actively on Twitter, yet Twitter is used in mainstream media and news coverage. Yes,
Kyle.
in short.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think Twitter only amplifies. I think, well, it brings out probably the worst in us as far as when it comes to quick responses and being aggressive and hiding behind anonymity. Can't say that word, but yeah, I don't think it. I think it's good for some things and bad for others, and I think we are seeing a lot of the effects of the negative aspect of it.
I think we lost some of the steadiness with it. Kind of the thinking before reacting phase. When I mean by steadiness, I mean that is really thinking about what you say, the impact that it has on others. There's just a lot of mean people out there. It brings our little inner gremlins out. I'm guilty. Like there have been times where I've really like I've seen stuff on Twitter. I'm like, this is not true, and I really like. But is it worth me to engage? And that's like because I know they're gonna come back and they're gonna do like Oppo research on me, and then I mean they might find something I did 30 years ago before I was born. I'm just kidding. I'm not. But anyway, so it's like it's just is it worth it?
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't know. I do think it has changed in how we like how quick we are to anger. It's so much easier just to fire off a quick response.
Yeah, so good shout out from Sarah. Good word choice, steadiness. I agree. Yeah, I feel that myself too when I use Twitter. I probably use Twitter more than the two of you combined, and which is not saying a lot because one of you uses it 0. But the yeah, I've noticed it, and I try to change at least how I've communicated over the last year or so with Twitter, because I used to kind of just want to like engage in the stuff that I thought was like kind of like righteous pile-ons and that sort of thing, and that's not very productive. And even if I totally do agree with it, sometimes I think to myself like, okay, well, if the counterpoint is already out there, then like just let the counterpoint be out there. I don't have to like add to that discourse. So I think being able to focus on how and why you use different things, or different online tools is important. I don't know if there's a society-wide solution to all this, because you're essentially just asking people to be better people in an environment where human nature takes over. So I would say that probably what people should do is, again, find the voices that you think are worthy of your trust and make sure that they're from diverse perspectives. And then if you're not in the battle of, the contemporary discourse, then check out for most of these things. Like, you don't have to be a part of, like, Facebook can be a thing where you're posting with friends and family. It doesn't have to be about politics. LinkedIn can be a professional network. It doesn't have to be, flooded with political sloganeering as it comes in different cycles. So people can say anything online. They need to pause and think, would they say that to a person face to face? Yeah, that is the lack of, and I'm not using this as like a euphemism of accountability. Like, you're not accountable to your words. That's why I don't use social media anonymously, because it's like, I don't want to be like, oh, hey, we found your hidden Twitter account. Like I'd rather, like, if you hire me, like, you just know, like, this is kind of where I stand and what I do. I do good work. I'm happy to talk about this, but I have my work stuff too. I think the anonymity is important for like whistleblowers and that kind of thing. And I can understand why in a kind of a hegemonic culture that enforces its dictates very strictly, why people who are counter hegemony would want to be anonymous, but I don't think it's a long-term solution. I think it creates way more problems than it solves.
Well, that too, but like just emotional intelligence is like, I think online is an all-time low. Just the amount of emotional intelligence it takes to like just have that perseverance to be like, or that reserve to be like, I wouldn't say that to them in person. In person, your EI or EQ or whatever you want to call it is a little bit higher, but online it's just like that goes out the window. In some cases, because like to Sam's point, the anonymity is, I can hide behind a keyboard. I don't have to. I can create an alias for myself, and I can like be that monster that can just let it all out. And so,
it kind of it encourages people to be impulsive and just say kind of like what's kind of at the tip of their tongue or something like that, and not really hold back because there's no consequence for it. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it definitely. I've always thought that social media in general has good qualities, that like the information can be out there to go get. You can, like Mike said, go look at different points of view, and like you can see the information that's out there. And it could also be helpful for staying in contact with friends and family that are distant. But it comes with a lot of negatives, and I think the wise social media user understands those negatives and kind of uses that when they're figuring out whether they want to post or not post or engage in social media at all, because that's definitely something to keep in mind. There's a lot of aggressive anonymous people out there that you're engaging with. You probably shouldn't even engage with them.
Yeah, we have another chat that says, I'm concerned about how the relentless consumption of bite-sized information affects critical thinking skills. Well, Kyle, really quickly, Kyle, you and I will have to have a conversation at some point about emotional intelligence, because I don't think EQ is. My understanding is if you factor analyze it, it doesn't reliably present itself after controlling for general G intelligence, which is not a perfect measure, but it's fair enough, and the big five. But maybe I'm wrong, and we can chat about that as a crossover episode. But to this point about affecting critical thinking skills, I agree that bite-sized information affects critical thinking skills, but I think it's not just the character count of information. It's also the quality of that information. So I can read a 2 or 3 sentence tweet that is rich in novel information, or I can watch a news report that is essentially telling me nothing other than what the producers of that news report want me to think.
Yeah.
It is probably easier online because the nature of everything is so, seeking of your attention, trying to keep you on the platform and designed to be easily consumed. Yeah. But I don't know if that's a unique thing here so much as that the emergence of it has shown that of that availability of bite-sized information has shown that that's what we're predisposed to anyway. And it just took previous forms.
I like this question because for those of you that don't know, I'm in the learning field. Not higher education. I'm not like Mike. I'm not a professor. But I work for I'm in the corporate learning space, and so bite-sized learning has been kind of the way to go. You hear micro learning, and now we're throwing out a new term out there, nano learning, which is 2 minutes or less. And the example I keep going back to is I used to see it. It was a commercial where there's a kid, kid maybe younger than me. So I know in my generation, I was learned. Maybe I should learn grammar, but I learned how to change my tire, change my oil, all that kind of stuff. But now the younger generation, have those critical thinking skills. It's more of, can I look it up on my phone? And if so, and I'm guilty of that too, just changing the brakes on a car. Like, oh, I can easily find this information rather than looking at the Chilton manual to see how to do this and then working my way through there. So I do think that yes, the access to, I guess, bite-sized pieces of content, it kind of is a shortcut in my mind. It's a shortcut to the solution rather than if you take away the technology, take away everything. I'm out in the wilderness and something goes wrong. Do I have the critical thinking skills to, for one, identify what the problem is, reframe the problem if I need to, and then come up with a solution? So I do think that yes, in a way, technology and the access to bite-sized pieces of content will affect our critical thinking skills. And I also look at with TikTok, the emergence of TikTok, and now you got Reels. Like we're consuming content in 60 seconds or less.
Yeah.
And so now our attention spans are also changing. So that could be a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you could think of it like social media is a tool, and tools can be used for various things, right? So like Kyle, like you said, like you could use social media or just the internet in general as a tool to like learn how to change the brakes on your car or something like that. But you could also unwisely use that tool to sit there and consume content, 4 hours a day, and which is just kitten videos or something like that. It's just a tool. So the critical thinking and I would say common sense on how to use certain tools need to be at the forefront before you even engage and before you even know what you're even doing with that tool.
Yeah, because looking at the chat here, the social media, those tools can be used to spread propaganda, to spread untruthful things, and to someone who doesn't know, that doesn't have the ability to think for themselves, will take others' words for it, will sit there and just take all that as truth, and they will go die on that hill before they even think about digging in and understanding, well, what is it? That's something I know I want to teach my son. He's 5 months, so I got some time, but I do want to teach him. I want you to be able to think for yourself. Somebody tells you something, that's the unfortunate thing. If somebody tells you something, I want you to be able to process what they're saying, but also think for yourself and like, is this a right or wrong? What does, like, here's the process, here's what's laid out for you. You have to decide what either is it right or is it wrong, and do the best that you can, because we can't train for every scenario out there. So that is that's a very tough one for me.
Yeah, I like what you said, that if you think about critical thinking as like the translation of what you're doing or what you're consuming, then yeah, I would agree with you and Elizabeth, who said essentially that it could be affecting critical thinking skills. My whole point is that I'm not any more convinced that cognitively offloading your thinking skills to people who are more verbose or put on a production that looks, credible necessarily means that it is so. That's all. It's almost like the embodied form of, let's say, journalism or scientific communication at some point became detached from the pursuit of objective truth. And I don't know how to put those pieces back together at an institution level, but I can I have enough trust in people that over enough time, the good ideas will win out over the bad ideas, if nothing else, because reality imposes itself at some point.
I think you fix it not on the institution level, but rather on the individual level.
Okay.
Yeah, because just as you hear misinformation or whatever types of different information from different news sources. Well, hold on. No, that's a bad example. But figuring out what you want to post online, you could ask yourself, I think it has to change as an individual. Should I post this? Is it good to post? Something like that. But the tool is going to be there. The social media tool is there. And I don't think taking away from that is probably likely, like dumbing social media down or course correcting or refining it. I think how we use it's got to change. So that begins at an individual level.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. All right. So we've got probably about another 15 minutes or so. I guess we can take any other questions people have, or we can move straight on to what's next for each of the podcasts.
Well, I can't see the chat, so I don't know. Are people chatting?
Yeah, they're saying they really like this Sam character.
Thank you. I really like you, whoever you are.
All right, man. So I'll keep monitoring the chat, but Sam, why don't you kick it off? Talk to us about what's coming next on Conventional Wisdom.
Okay, so now that we're done with this Twitter file stuff, my next podcast, don't quote me on when it's coming, but it is coming. It's going to be on, I think, it's going to be more cultural, actually. So it's going to be a discussion about good movies and bad movies. What makes a good movie? What makes a good story? And hopefully we can more broadly answer the question, what makes good art? It's an interesting thing because art's always been that thing where it's like, oh, that's subjective. The beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But is it? So I don't know. I'll discuss that, and I'll talk a whole lot about different movies, and especially the movies that have come out. I'm pretty opinionated with a bunch of movies that are recent, and just because I think that they've got terrible morals, like the moral of the story, and then they have bad just messages in general. So I think that's what I'm going to talk about. I might also
Question: are you going to talk about John Wick?
No, I was going to say do that one. Do John Wick and Top Gun while you're at it. I'm curious.
I might bring them up just to say if I do bring up those two, it would be just something like, here are the themes that both John Wick and Top Gun got right, and just in the broader context that the rest of the movie industry now is just getting so terribly wrong. That's why they are quite popular. John Wick, I think, I don't know the success of John Wick 4, but I do know that the latest Top Gun pretty much crushed a bunch of records and pretty much saved Hollywood for a bit. So I might bring that up. And I might also do an episode coming up in the future. I might talk about Bitcoin. That's maybe a curveball to this to at least my channel, but there's probably something to be said in there. So
Sam is releasing his own line of non-fungible tokens, so get in now.
Yeah, it's going to be hot. It's going to be the next big thing.
But no, that's good. So I actually haven't seen any of the John Wicks, which I know is like a cardinal sin in this group. But I'll be interested to hear that. I know we have, I think Joe was watching at least part of the stream. I'm sure maybe you should have him on next because I think he takes a counter position to yours.
I know he does. I know he does. I do want... I actually do. I think it would be beneficial to sit down and talk about like what makes good art, because he's certainly he's another individual who's quite opinionated, and I completely respect his opinions. And so I think that would make for a good episode.
Yeah.
Just don't talk badly about Linkin Park, whatever you do.
All right, Cal. What's next on Thought Pioneering?
So Thought Pioneering, I was going to do an episode at the beginning of the year, but our fearless leader had us doing some Twitter files and stuff. So had to push that back about half a decade. So I am doing my next episode called Growing to Greatness. This year I'm kind of taking a newer approach to it, where the whole thought behind thought pioneering is the thought provoking discussion, and sometimes I'll have a panel, I'll have a people on a panel, or a person to have a thought provoking discussion on. But for those episodes that I'm talking by myself, I'm going to be diving into some innovations that are like real life innovations. I know one of them that I'm pretty interested in. It's stuff that I find fascinating too, but one of them is I'm going to do about a segment at the beginning of the podcast to talk about innovation, and then dive into that, like explore some ideas there. And then the meat of the episode will be about the art of feedback. So it's about growing. It's about growth, and growth is painful. We all know that at this point, but you don't know. It's kind of like going back to, you can't manage what you don't measure. So how to measure how well you're doing, and sometimes that comes in the form of feedback. So how to ask for feedback, how to accept feedback, how to take the feedback that you get from other people, whether it be qualitative or quantitative feedback, and apply that to becoming better. So you'll hear me say this a lot, but I do believe that good is the enemy of great, and you got to keep looking at it from that angle, because if you remain stagnant, it's like that saying, there's no growth in the comfort zone, no comfort in the growth zone. So next episode will be about growing to greatness, and I'll throw in a little bit of an innovation share, if you will. I'm gonna try not to call it that, but it'll be like an innovation moment, and just kind of explore, because that is at the very end of the day, Thought Pioneering is a podcast about creativity and innovation. I want to make sure I keep that at the forefront. Throughout the rest of the year, I do plan on doing some other episodes, like what is a thought pioneer, thought leadership. So as a leader, how do you increase like the creativity in others? I did kind of cover a little bit of that with the psychological safety episodes, but that one was geared more towards how do I make people feel like they can contribute their ideas based off of background, whatever it may be. Um, that was a fun series. I might actually bring Jane back to talk more about like thoughtful leadership, and really get her ideas to like, as we think about like, and I'm gonna say thoughtful, maybe mindful leadership, but just taking into consideration, how do I lead others in a way that's kind of meeting them where they are. So it'll be more of a leadership episode, but yeah, that's the direction I've got for Thought Pioneering. Looking forward to Growing to Greatness coming out in the next month or so.
Real quick, Kyle, or really quickly rather. You say good is the enemy of great? Okay.
Maybe.
What about this other cliche that done is better than perfect?
Can you add some more flavor to that for me?
I don't know what that means. It's a nonsense term.
Can you add some more color to that? Can you add some more seasoning? Can you unpack that? Can you add some more cheese to that cracker, Mike? What do you mean Dawn is the enemy of what? Sorry.
Oh, you just didn't hear me.
Yeah.
He just had that like
Yeah.
cocked and ready.
Yeah.
The question was, how do you balance that good is the enemy of great versus done is better than perfect?
Oh, well, that's like rapid. It's like, okay. So, coming from like the continuous improvement and lean methodology, it's always better to to continuously improve rather than get it perfect, because I don't know. There's like a lot of research that goes behind that, but yeah. You say done is better than perfect, or what?
Yeah.
I may be misunderstanding.
No,
Well,
that's
it sounds like good. The good is the enemy of great. Sounds like you are settling for something like you're settling for something subpar, or at least something that's like passable as good.
Mhm.
The done is what was it? Done is better than
Perfect.
perfect.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, it
It might
depends.
take you
Maybe
10
done
years.
is a big
Yeah.
step,
Yeah. Maybe.
and
Sure.
yeah, I mean, so this is how I do my scripts for my podcast. Like it's a complete rough draft, and as rough as it possibly can be.
Mhm.
And I'm like, all right, just get it done. You know what I mean? I can improve incrementally. I can shape it up. I can do some editing, but just record, get it done.
Right.
But going like from the innovator's mindset, you can ideate. Done perfect is like the ideation process, if you will. If I'm taking it in that terms, I can ideate all I want, but unless I actually do something, then it doesn't really matter. So, and when I do like 1.1 of that, whatever it may be, that idea, 99.9% of the time, what you draw on the paper versus what is actually implemented, it changes.
Hmm.
So it's better to get it out there, get people to give you feedback on that idea. Yeah, good as the enemy of great is like don't settle for good, because that is the enemy of becoming great. And then once you achieve greatness, like at a certain point, that greatness will now be the next good. And so to continuously improve. So that's where the rationale is.
Okay. So aim low but up.
Mm. Aim for the sun, land on the moon.
Okay.
Aim for the moon, land on the sun. I don't know, whatever you want to slice and dice. I'll put it this way: if I wanted the Twitter files presentation to be perfect, we wouldn't have had one to go through.
Right. Yeah. We just had to do this live stream. Well, it's the end of Q1, so that was the nice
Mhm.
hard stopping point. So we have a couple messages from David, Nahal, and Sarah all about ChatGPT because we promised we'd get to that. So we'll
Oh
get to
my
that right
gosh,
before
please,
closing
please let me.
because it's a fair enough issue. But speaking of ChatGPT, if you want to hear more about it, I have a returning guest for my next episode, Leandra Gonzalez, who will be on, and I hope to have that episode out next week. Probably by the end of the week. If not, it'll be very early the week after. It's a long podcast, probably the longest single podcast episode I've done. So she was kind enough to come on the first time and discuss data science. She works at one of the tech companies as a data science professional and has all the bona fides to back it up. This time we kind of, we kind of did a dance around some of the more controversial stuff and where there might be philosophical disagreements in the first episode, but we weren't hiding from it. We were just having a conversation about data science. But any conversation about data science, any good conversation needs to be grounded in analytical rigor, but also ethical reflection, something like that. And so we get into that in this next episode. So she was superb in that regard. So highly recommend that one, and very grateful for her coming out and showing out in that regard. I have another episode that it was released earlier this year from Kyle. It's an interview with Kyle Maxwell. He does a lot more opining, so it's a little bit less conversant in that way, but it was the kind of an inside look at someone who's a young man trying to bootstrap his own philosophy on life and doing it in a way by kind of reading some of the great texts and reaching back into some of their minds. And so I think that in that sense, it was really awesome. And so it's cool to be able to explore that. He's got his own YouTube channel, his own stuff he's doing. So check him out if you're interested. Kyle Maxwell. All right. Now, with that stuff out of the way, obligatory shill for the merch and the locals page. And, we have a free newsletter, the FreedomCast Courant. It's a weekly newswire. We'll also post some additional Substack articles through there. We'll probably have some Twitter file stuff coming on before too long. But in any case, all those will be in the links to this recording, and they should be in the description of it now. So if you're interested, that's where you can find it. Now, we promised something about ChatGPT. So, all right. Nahal says she is concerned about the increasing use of large language models and search engines because it gets hard to separate fact from falsehood because of artificial hallucinations or large language models like ChatGPT conviction that the information is correct. So okay. So a couple points here. What are your thoughts on ChatGPT to the extent you've interacted with it? And then in a world increasingly run by imperfect but still impressive engines, how do we discern truth?
I think are you asking us?
Yeah.
Well, I did mine like sarcastically. I sent y'all all the screenshots.
Kyle was stress testing some of the bias claims.
Yeah, so I go back. So as an L&D professional, I taught unconscious bias course and still have. One of the examples that we used was the YouTube analogy or YouTube story, where the story behind that was YouTube was creating like unconscious bias was introduced there because a lot of the engineers at YouTube were right-handed, so they created the app to be right-handed, and it was biased against left-handed users. And so left-handed users would upload the videos would be upside down. That was like the whole story. But here
the audacity.
How dare they? But here it's okay. I think Mike or one of y'all brought it up earlier. It's like, yeah, you have like the AI is still good, but you have to have a human element to write somewhere there's a human element, and if that human element is biased in any way, that's only going to be amplified with that AI, because at that point it's just going to continue to learn. I don't know. I'm not an AI expert. I'm not an AI expert. So.
But there's no bias situation. This is like
there's not.
Yeah, so I don't begrudge people their bias. I just want an honest characterization of it, as honestly as you can represent it. Then fair enough. And then we can, if I know where you're coming from and you know where I'm coming from, then it's like, all right, we came from different perspectives. We can still have a conversation. I mean, I think we can still have a conversation. But you're right. To the layperson, an algorithm is just presented kind of as an oracle, and I think this is kind of what Nahal's point is, which is, hey, if this oracle tells me something is true, and I say that doesn't sound true, but there's pushback which you can generate output from these algorithms that says something like, no, I'm right. Then where does that leave us, Sam?
Well, I have just a philosophical sort of take on this emergence of AI. I don't know what the future might look like as far as AI taking over some jobs. I suspect that as AI does more work of humans, I think humans are just going to find new jobs. I think that's probably been the case with just more emergent technologies. But when it comes to like querying things into the internet and having, you don't know if it's AI come back, it's the same thing with like photographs. You've seen like the AI generated art, that some of them are, extremely difficult to tell the difference between like what's real and what's not. So I think what's going to happen is that people are going to, if they are, well, I don't know if I could say the majority or minority here. I don't know. There's going to be some subset of the population that's going to be increasingly suspicious of everything that they're seeing, whether it be an image or a photo or a video or some article, anything, because it could be AI generated and you don't really know whether it's real or not. So there's going to be some part of the population that's going to have to think a bit more critically, first of all, at how do you behave and what are some of your priorities, given that you don't fully understand the truth around you. Sure. And if you want, if I could shill my own podcast, I talked about my values episode and what to do when you don't know what's true. As I describe in that episode, everyone's got sort of a hierarchy of values, and towards the top, I think at least for me and hopefully for everybody, truth should be high up there. We should always be striving to know what is true. Unfortunately, with the emergence of AI, I think that's going to call into question a lot of things, and you're going to have to understand what could possibly be above that truth value, because you simply won't know. Mm-hmm. You could ask the internet something, what happened. You can even ask it a historical fact, and it could come back and tell you, and maybe a textbook says one thing, but this says. But if you don't have a textbook, you have to just take this for what it's worth. So to really not know what's true, you are going to have to figure out what do you value that's like how are you going to push forward when you don't know what's true, what's around you? How are you going to behave? What's the thing that's going to maybe provide meaning to you? People are going to have to come to terms with that. And I think ultimately that's going to point towards, well, a value that's higher than truth. And I think for many, it's probably God. So that's probably what people are going to, like I said, maybe some subset of the population is going to at least have a challenging thought about this. In my opinion, philosophically, that's where it's going to lead.
Yeah, to the extent people are just, rational calculators, which we're not, but at a species level or at least at a market level, like we do make some consequential calculations. And I think that in a situation where you have a voluminous information environment and so much of it seems to be credible, just about the worst thing you could do is spend the decade preceding this advent of this new technology promoting disinformation experts who do nothing but make the problem worse. And now we're less equipped than we would otherwise be, because we actually needed people who were genuinely disinformation experts and really knew this stuff to step forward, and now that well is poisoned, and there's not really much you can do about it, unfortunately. But you can be honest communicators and you can be authentic. So this is going to Sydney's point, which is I think we will come to a point that if we don't see it firsthand, we have to question its authenticity. And I think that, yeah, this goes back to the verify, but how do you verify? How do you ground truth? And so, yeah, the advent of increasingly, you can just chime in, Kyle. You got it.
Well, I'm saying I need to run. So.
You're good. All right, thanks, buddy. We'll be off in a second.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.
All right.
See ya.
Check out Thought Pioneering. So yeah, I think with these increasingly powerful algorithms, whether or not AGI ever comes around is perhaps a separate point. We can do plenty of damage without having artificial general intelligence, and there will be economic displacement, to be sure. I don't know if that's a net positive or not. I suspect that maybe in the short term, probably not, but in the long term, maybe. But when you can't ground truth anything, or when you have to question so much around you, we need to give people ladders to cognitive faculties to still be able to navigate the world. And I think having an explicit values hierarchy is one of those things. And if you don't have that, then I suspect what you will do is you will treat the algorithm as if it's a deity. And it's not clear that that's wise. I mean, you can say that something like the inherited biblical tradition is socially constructed. It's like, yeah, okay. But it's going to be no less socially constructed than, I think, how people operate in the presence of these things. But at the same time, there's very kind of what people would not consider flashy or sexy ways to interact with these machines that just help people do work. And in that sense, I don't want to overstate the case for or against large language models or any other sort of kind of cutting edge algorithm. I think they're important. I think it will be. I know enough to know that I don't know how it's going to shake out on the economic front. On the philosophical front, people should read and know why they believe what they believe, and have a system by which they're willing to update their beliefs and make that as explicit as possible, because otherwise you can't hold yourself to it. And that's who you're accountable to, is yourself and anyone you have responsibility over. So, yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's super deep. We should probably, maybe if we don't have anything to talk about next quarter, is just spend an entire thing on this. And what we can try and do is we can try and get more people on this, because we do have some supporters. We promised them that they could get on the live stream. So maybe
actually, I was kind of thinking back when I was talking about what episodes I was going to do, I was kind of thinking like maybe just send it out to the chat, be like, hey, chat, if there's anybody that has a deep philosophical like question or problem and you want to do an episode with me about it, send it my way. And we could probably do it, if it's a good deep question that you can really sort of do a deep dive on, then I would love to do an episode with you.
Yeah, definitely check out Sam's bumper episode. It's like 90 seconds long, but then his first episode, he kind of lays out what his conceptualization of wisdom is, and it delineates it from just like book smarts or rationality, or even
smarts that you might get from an AI.
Yeah, true. And so we'll see on that front. I think that Kurt Gödel and the postmodern critiques and Dave Chapman from AI and MIT, I think all these people kind of hit on something on the limits of logical systems, and that will probably save us from true great AGI threats, at least until maybe the quantum comes or something. But like I said, you could do plenty of damage with systems that are not AGI, and so we'll see. But yeah, watch out for deepfakes. Don't believe everything you see. Find some voices you trust. We'll try to be some of those voices, and we'll be honest when we get stuff wrong. And other than that, we'll say what we think and represent it as honestly.
Freely.
We'll speak freely. There you go. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. And this will be up. And if you want to reach out to us, just go to freedomcast.us.
All right, guys.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks. I guess I should stop